Welcome everybody. Hope you're safe out there and not going too stir crazy. I know it's been a challenge, but you know, it's something that we've all been able to kind of learn some things about ourselves and about how I guess durable and rugged we are as a country. But glad to be here today. Glad that you guys have joined us, and thanks for giving us some of your time. I want to talk to you guys today about enabling a secure and effective remote workforce. And what does that mean? Well, with COVID-19, obviously, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of people having to work remotely that didn't previously work remotely. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But Caleb did introduce me. I just want to talk a little bit about who I am and where I came from. So I am the regional threat prevention expert for Checkpoint, covering the southern U.S. And what that means is for endpoint, SaaS protection, and mobility solutions, I am the technical expert on that side. My counterpart, Michael Cranford's not here with me today, but he's been with the company even longer than I have. I've been here over 6 years now, and I think he's been here over 8. So we've seen a lot of things change. No changes as drastic as what we've seen recently, but thank you guys for being here. And at Checkpoint, we want to make sure that we let you know that we're here for you, whatever you need during this time of crisis. So to get started, what we're going to talk about today is the COVID-19 outbreak and how it's affected not just our everyday lives, but our work lives and all of that. Then I'm going to talk about the 4 principles for remote connectivity, and that'll be sort of from the administrative standpoint. What does it mean for an IT staff, for a security staff to enable more people to work remotely? And then secure remote connectivity. So how can we realize secure remote connectivity with many more people working off-prem now? And then preventing cyber attacks. So this is something that, as Caleb mentioned, I've specialized in and like to talk about. So cyber attacks are happening all around this. They were happening even before COVID-19, but I'll talk a little bit about how during the COVID-19 outbreak, attackers have taken advantage of that. And then we'll talk about the top best practices for us as the employees ourselves. So what can we do to better keep ourselves secured during the remote work craze, if you will. And then we'll discuss some next steps and kind of wrap up. So the outbreak, I mean, everybody's seen the news. It's deeply impacted, as is mentioned here, it's deeply impacted the way that companies run their operations. It's hit probably a lot of us on a personal level, and then hit us all on a professional level as well. So working remotely, it's what our new reality is, whether it be, and I'm sure you've seen the memes or seen the videos or the pictures of people who thought they were, you know, they're wearing a sport coat up top and shorts down bottom, and they didn't realize that they were all fully on the camera, you know, or people walking in, kids walking in, pets running across the keyboard. So it's a lot of fun stuff, a lot of funny stuff that's happening. So it's kind of changed how we're doing things. It seems more casual, if you will. But the challenges are that most organizations aren't prepared to support how we do this work remotely. Like, there's a lot of things that haven't been taken into consideration for a lot of companies because most people were working from on-prem or from a specific remote office or whatever. So it was pretty cut and dried, but now I'm going to talk about how this has impacted business and how we can better prepare ourselves for this new norm. So as I mentioned before, hackers they smell blood. So they see blood in the water because there's uncertainty, and that always generates opportunity. So what we have seen a trend, our Checkpoint research team, there's been a trend of a spike, huge spike actually, in coronavirus domains registered on a weekly basis. And what we're finding is that most of these are not legitimate. They're not around actually trying to protect people or inform people, but they're actually out there with the intent of stealing information or of causing panic or, you know, any number of things, but they're looking to do some damage or get some sort of competitive advantage with this type of trick. So cyber criminals are, you know, obviously still on the rise because it's a way for people to, you know, make money and stay out of the forefront, out of the limelight. And obviously, you know, for someone who has a criminal background or someone who has criminal intent anyway, cybercrime is very profitable and honestly very easy these days, because at the end of the day, it's still about just trying to figure out who you can trick into clicking on something. With that, it's very important to understand that with a lot more people working from home, that risk factor, that attack surface has increased greatly for remote working. So with increased access and more people accessing remotely, the risk has become much greater. So what are some of the common attack vectors that we see? You know, the usual suspects. We see email, we see web-based attacks. Email's still the king, kind of, because it's so widely used. It's content agnostic for the most part, so you can see all kinds of legitimate content that can be sent over email, as well as all kinds of illegitimate content. And then file shares. So an easy way for an attacker to get something into a network, upload it to a OneDrive or SharePoint account, or even Box or Dropbox, and then share that link out through an email to a company. And then if somebody clicks on that file to download it, now they're inside the organization and they can move far and wide. Phishing, obviously, if they can gain credentials by getting somebody to click on something, that's definitely an easy way for them to get into an organization. Malicious networks, malicious applications. And on the malicious networks tab there for a second, it's not just connecting to malicious networks at coffee shops and, you know, hotels and airports, like has always been a risk. It's also about if your Wi-Fi network is open at home, or if you accidentally connect to an open Wi-Fi network from your next door neighbor, then you're potentially opening yourself up for attack there as well, because you could be connecting to a network where an attacker can see all of your data. And then you've got malicious applications. So you've got, if we're dealing with mobile devices or smartphones and tablets, we could be talking about malicious applications that are side-loading other types of content that can either take over a device or siphon information off. And then man-in-the-middle attacks. So if they can successfully get in between you and where you think you're going, they can get a lot of information. The keys to the kingdom that they're after eventually is what we refer to as an account takeover. And an account takeover is obviously self-explanatory, where they've taken over credentials. They appear to be a legitimate user, so they can do whatever that user can do. They can also trick other people into downloading content or spreading content that is malicious because they think it's coming from a trusted party. So that's kind of the end game for an attacker, and something that we need to be ever more increasingly aware of. So how do we connect the dots on this? There's so many different paths that an attacker could take to get into your organization. And they could, start in one place and go to another. So could be an email that has an attachment that has some malicious content embedded in it, a shell script, whatever. Once that's executed, then they have control of the device, and then at that point, whatever credentials are on the device or whatever the device has access to, they have access to. So you can see the paths are seemingly endless here, but it's a lot of things that we need to think about. And so at Checkpoint, this is what we do on a daily basis, is think about how can people be hacked, or how can people be attacked, so that we can ensure that we can provide not just a point solution, but provide an overarching solution for every piece of data and every user, no matter where they are and what they're accessing. So with that, I want to move on and talk a little bit about secure remote connectivity. So how do we realize that as an organization? Well, we've kind of broken it down into 4 specific practices that you can follow, and we've found that these are effective for existing customers, and then people that we've talked to. We've gotten a lot of good feedback that these are not only something that is effective, but it's something that's easy to understand and lay out within your organization, just to sort of close the gap there. So first off, striking a new security pose. And what does that mean? Well, we need to take all of these resources that are mission critical, including the ones that aren't, but obviously we want to, take priority with the ones that are mission critical. And we need to figure out which groups need permissions to those particular resources and tune the security policy accordingly. And why this is, has to be revisited now that we've got a lot more people working remotely is because a lot of times we'll have policies in place, like firewall policies, for instance, and access control policies that are geared toward most people working on-prem, which means that you've got, policies in place that say from this particular LAN desktop network to these servers, allow the access, right? But there may be some rules out there that are allowing inbound access that we weren't aware of because we didn't know that we needed to explicitly prevent specific outbound access. Or you may have a case where a user that's used to being on-prem and having a very limited scope of access, now they have an expanded scope of access, and either through misconfiguration, through fat fingering, or through malicious intent, they could potentially do damage because now they have access to things that they didn't before. So we need to adjust those policies to kind of tighten that access for a lot more people working remotely. We also need to adjust the infrastructure, right? So if nobody can access anything because the internet pipe is completely full, then we can't do business. So that's another consideration. The second phase of our 4 principles is trust no one. And we've heard the term, probably most of you have heard the term thrown around, zero trust. We need to take that mindset. And what that means is identify and label all of your sensitive data so that we can create policies that make sure only the appropriate people have access to it. So it's sort of a drilled down from what we were talking to previously. We needed to map the resources to group permissions. Now we need to get down to the user level, and we need to identify every piece of sensitive data that we have in the company and make sure that only the people that need access, what the government calls least privilege, only what they need access to is what they have access to. And then, with password policies, obviously, most of us are aware that we need a strong password policy in place, but even a strong password policy is not enough anymore because the computational feasibility for an attacker to compromise a password through brute force or dictionary attacks is much greater now with the hardware that we have, that they have at their disposal. So what we need to do is ensure that we have some sort of multi-factor authentication in place for all the remote users, and that includes all the people that didn't previously have remote access. Next, make sure that every endpoint is touched, and that means map all the new endpoints, whether it be companies that are allowing people to use their home PC or their personal laptop or their personal mobile device, or if it's a company-owned device. Regardless of who owns the device, we need to map those endpoints that will connect remotely, and then make sure that all of those endpoints are included in these security policies that we're talking about that we need to beef up. And looks like we had something come in here. Let me take it. Okay, yeah, so we got not a question. All right, so we also need to dry run the infrastructure and the security policies. So we need to make sure that after we've updated all these policies in the infrastructure, we need to make sure that it all flows smoothly, right? So you don't want to just throw this all out there and install a bunch of new policies and just hope that it works and hope that there's no kinks. You want to test the kinks and work them out before you go live, if you will, for everyone. So this also includes testing the performance and connectivity. We talked about before, you don't want to bottleneck on your internet pipe with a lot more inbound traffic. And then access to relevant assets, we want to make sure that it's enabled. So we want to enable the speed of and the access of business, but we also want to make sure that it's secure and locked down. And then we want to try our best to imitate some real life scenarios. And there's a lot of guidance out there. We have, you know, our own business continuity guidance that we can provide for you. There's a lot of good documentation and guidance for business continuity policies out on the web. And this would be a business continuity policy because we're talking about, you know, some sort of natural disaster type scenario where more people are forced to work in a different location in a different format than they usually do. So this would be covered under, you know, a business continuity type policy. So the top best practices for the employees themselves. So for us as the employees, that's a little bit different. So we need to take it on ourselves to make sure that we have beefed up our passwords. There are a lot of online password generators that you can use to generate an extremely strong password. There are also a lot of tools out there that you can use and a lot of techniques that you can use to create a secure password. Things such as creating a phrase that you'll remember and making that phrase into a password by using maybe the first letter from each one and changing some of them to numbers and then putting in a couple of symbols, right? So obviously upper lowercase symbols and numbers are all good aspects of a strong password, but just make sure that you are not only creating strong passwords, but appropriately protecting them as well. And then we need to be aware of phishing attacks. So as I mentioned earlier, the domains related to the coronavirus are 50% more likely to be malicious. So we're seeing as many malicious ones being created, if not more, than legitimate ones. So we need to make sure that anytime we see something that's related to the virus, do your homework and ensure that everything is on the up and up before you click on it or follow something to a different page. Or, you know, heaven forbid you give up your credentials, right, for something like that. And then choose your device carefully. So if we are having to use, I mentioned earlier, we need to map, you know, all the devices. We need to also check the device. If it's a device that's not company owned, make sure that you have put in place the security that's needed in order to protect the device itself, because at the end of the day, your network protections are only as good as the weakest link, and the weakest link generally tends to be the endpoint. So strong antivirus is obviously a good start with that. We also need to talk about who's listening in. So unsecure networks, as I mentioned earlier, if you're on an open network, now's a good time to figure out how to secure that network. So put a key on it. And I think most of us are probably there, but it's just, these are the things that we need to be aware of and that we need to make all of our employees aware of so that everyone has the strongest security posture possible. So secure remote connectivity. What does that mean from a checkpoint standpoint? Well, our approach to it is we start with remote access VPN. So providing secure and private access to the data from anywhere is the first step to ensuring that data doesn't get into the wrong hands, right? If you create a tunnel from end to end with strong encryption, then the chances of an attacker being able to intercept that traffic and decrypt it are very small. Then the next step, mobile access. So with more people working remotely, there's going to be more mobile devices that are being used to access company data. So we need to make sure that we're using enterprise-grade remote access security. So what does that mean? That means providing a secure container on the device, which is Capsule Workspace. It also means protecting the device itself. So you can provide a secure container such as private email access and private web access or web application access. But if the device itself becomes compromised, then all that security goes out the window. So it's very important to protect the device itself from malicious applications, malicious networks, so on and so forth. So you can also find more information on secure remote access on our blog. We have blogs.checkpoint.com that you can go to, and you can find these exact titles, so top tips for secure remote working, and that's for the employee, and then implementing effective security measures for remote workforce. That's for, you know, from an administrative standpoint, talking about how you can engage the users to educate them. You can also create the policies to allow secure remote access. I've talked a lot about endpoints, and the reason is because, as I mentioned, the endpoint is currently the weakest link because it's the last line of defense. Well, sometimes it's the first line of defense, but in the case of you know, an inbound attack, it's the last line of defense for you to be able to not only detect that something's happening, but stop the bank robber before he gets in the door. So the reason that the endpoints are the weakest link is, first of all, and foremost, they're outside the perimeter. So they're outside our traditional network, which has all of the bulky firewall and intrusion prevention and application control protections that we put into place. And even a lot of the advanced threat prevention stuff, you know, it's happening at the gateway. So all these endpoints are out beyond those protections. So when it's not connected to a VPN, that's when it's most vulnerable. Also, they require a lot of real-time updates. So what are we talking about with updates? Obviously, you know, the Windows updates, the operating system, the application updates, but we also need to make sure that the security tools on these devices are constantly updated as well. And with a constantly updating device, obviously that brings in challenges of, you know, management sprawl. So are we sure that every device is up to date all the time? And then finally, users. So humans are, in the whole chain of everything, humans are definitely the weakest link. And the reason is because they're the easiest to trick into doing something that they normally wouldn't do. The IDC releases a report every year, and they did say that 70% of the successful breaches that have been discovered originated on the endpoint. So we need, if we haven't been paying attention to the endpoints, now's the time. And I'll give you a few examples here. So one of the public ones that was very prominent was the Wall Street Journal and New York Times. And this Ryuk ransomware, if you heard about that, caused major server outages at both newspapers. And it was triggered by an illegitimate remote access tool that was running on a vulnerable endpoint. And this endpoint was actually, you know, one that was company owned, and but it wasn't up to date with all the patches, and it obviously wasn't up to date with, you know, the most effective security prevention techniques. Another one that our own incident response team was called into was that intellectual property was leaked and sold from a large U.S. medical device company. And this was known as the GATAC Trojan. It was disguised as a software keygen, exfiltrated sensitive data. So it's very important to understand that endpoint devices, end user devices, generally have a lot of sensitive data, have access to it, or have it stored locally. So we need to be able to protect against exfiltration of that data. Give me 1 minute. All right, I apologize for that. And I wasn't hit with a COVID attack or the GATAC Trojans. Anyway, so back to this one. So the employee tried to crack a protected digital book, and as much as we've seen a lot of the BitTorrent and things like that being disabled, we have still seen a lot of people using password crackers or crackers for specific software that they don't want to purchase. And that can obviously very easily lead to a vulnerable endpoint, which can be used to attack an organization. And then one third and final attack, a financial services company lost all of their customer data. So in this case, this is much worse than ransomware because this is what's referred to as a wiper attack. And if you're not familiar with wiper attacks, this one called the violent Neshta wiper malware actually completely destroys the data on all the devices that it's able to infect with no hope of retrieving the data. So in this case, this particular company did not have proper backups on every system that had critical data. So they were basically, they lost the data completely, never to be retrieved. And that was all their customer data. So you can imagine the impact of having to go back to the customers and say that, you know, we've lost your data when you retrieve it again. And, you know, who knows what they had to pay out in order to protect their customers in the future, because if the data could be wiped, then obviously it could have been stolen as well. So preventing cyber attacks, and this is the part I like to get to because we kind of get down into the nitty gritty here. I'm not going to get too deep, but I did want to talk about how at Checkpoint, our approach is prevention first. As I mentioned earlier a little bit, it's best if we're able to prevent the initial access or keep the bank robber from getting in the bank in the first place, because then we don't have to deal with, you know, do we pay a ransom, or we don't have to deal with all our data was lost, do we have backups? If we can prevent it before it ever hits the end user system, or if it hits the end user system and we're able to immediately identify it and deprecate all of the artifacts of the attack, then, you know, we've effectively avoided major damage. And that's where our solutions come in for the laptops, which is referred to as SANDBLAST Agent. And it's a complete endpoint security solution going beyond, you know, just EDR and next-gen AV, but also providing remote access capabilities and protecting disks, protecting data in motion and at rest. And then we've got the mobile protection suite referred to as SANDBLAST Mobile. Now, what goes into these SANDBLAST solutions, there's a couple of things that set the SANDBLAST solution apart from competing solutions. So our SANDBLAST suite of protections is advanced threat prevention that includes a sandboxing element. And this sandbox actually has a CPU level element that actually allows us to monitor the calls and returns between CPU and memory. And if there is any breach in that particular flow, then it's either malicious intent or bad coding. So we can cut them off before they're able to evade the sandbox. So while other sandboxes would be vulnerable to this type of attack, we can detect it with this additional CPU level engine. We also have what we refer to as threat extraction. And threat extraction is basically where, as files come into the network or into an email account, they are stripped of any and all active content, meaning that there's nothing even potentially exploitable left. So the end user can open the file with 100% confidence that there's nothing malicious in there. So that's how we're effectively able to stop the bank robber from getting into the bank in the first place. SANDBLAST Agent, the key benefits, it protects against known and unknown cyber attacks. So there are a lot of solutions out there that talk about being signatureless. While it is important to have a signatureless behavioral engine and artificial intelligence, all of that stuff, it's still important that we have a signature-based piece of a solution so that we can stop the previously known attacks. Because we have found that some of these that are only geared towards stopping unknown attacks have become vulnerable to previously known attacks. So it's important to have both elements, and we do. It is the best endpoint security to combat targeted and evasive attacks. I mentioned how we can avoid or detect evasion techniques with the CPU level engine, our sandbox. We can also detect it through behavioral techniques at the endpoint level itself. We do provide a high threat catch rate and low false positive rate, and you don't have to take our word for it. Forrester releases a report called the AMA Wave, and then NSS Labs does their advanced endpoint protection, and we have extremely high catch rates and low false positive rates on both. It does provide automated and detailed forensics. So if you're like most companies, you probably don't have a huge security staff that's dedicated to threat hunting or dedicated to triage of particular endpoint attacks. So what we do with SANDBLAST Agent is with a very complex algorithm, we're able to automate a lot of this process, and we're always collecting information, and after there is an attempted attack or a successful attack, we create a report showing what happened, was there any damage, damage data lost or stolen, also were we able to disinfect the whole attack and put the system back in a pre-infection state. And all of that automated creates a nice report that's human readable. You don't have to have a doctorate in forensics to understand it. And then finally, full attack containment and quick remediation. So when there is a potential attack, you want to make sure that if something does get through, that we contain it and we don't let it spread laterally. And then also the quick remediation piece, as I mentioned, we'll attempt to remove all of the artifacts of the attack and put the system in pre-infection state. I did mention NSS Labs and Forrester Wave. So this is the most recent NSS Labs that was released just a little over a month ago. We did have 100% block rate for HTTP and email malware, and we did block 100% of the evasions as well. And then a 0.8% false positive, which is obviously very low. So once again, you don't have to take our word for it. With SANDBLAST Agent, endpoints can be the strongest link with the on-device enforcement that's able to not only detect things very early on, but cut them off the knees to avoid damage. And then behavioral analysis and the forensic visibility that you get for every potential attack attempt, as well as indicators of attack on the endpoint itself. And then it is very user interactive. So I mentioned earlier that humans are a weak link in the chain. If we're able to engage the end user and let them know, hey, this is why this was not so good, then they'll be better aware next time when something comes up like that. So maybe they won't be as quick to click on it. And at Checkpoint, so our intent is not to provide, as I mentioned earlier, we're not out here to provide a point solution. We're here to provide intelligence and total protection across every threat vector and attack surface that exists in your organization. And our approach to that is what we refer to as Checkpoint Infinity. It provides multi-vector controls under a unified architecture, very small amount of clicks to deploy and manage these solutions, but all of these solutions tie together under a single architecture to provide the best mobile endpoint, cloud, and network protection with easy management. And then it's all tied together with our threat cloud, threat intelligence, and our Checkpoint research team that provides all the intelligence to feed all of these solutions so that they're always real-time updated with the most recent attack vectors. And we can break down, each of these categories. These are our particular solutions across these categories, and I won't go into detail on that, but this is something we can share with you guys so you can kind of understand the breadth of protection that Checkpoint Infinity can provide for you. So what are the next steps now that we've talked about a lot of this? Well, first of all, I am going to open it up for Q&A if you guys are interested in a little bit. But I did want, to share with you once again to summarize. We have these blog posts, the top tips for secure remote working. So I kind of summarized in the slides earlier, but you can get a lot more information on the blog posts themselves. And then the one that's titled Implementing Effective Security Measures for Remote Workforce. Once again, blog.checkpoint.com, you can find that particularly. I also would like to mention another site that's research.checkpoint.com, and you'll find not only articles for helping you be more secure, but you'll also find research articles on the most recent attacks, as well as the archives of previous attacks, so you can go and kind of get a better understanding about what we're seeing out in the wild. And a lot of these a lot of these articles are from discoveries that our own research team has made, and we were the first to find it. And then we also do weigh in on those that were found by other research organizations as well, or those that were just discovered out in the wild. So a lot of information and resources for you guys to take advantage of. And once again, it's research.checkpoint.com and blog.checkpoint.com. So with that, I appreciate you guys joining us today. Thanks for giving us the time. Thanks for having lunch with us. And I hope you guys stay safe and secure. And at this point, I'll throw it back to Caleb, but we also, I don't know what you guys want to do as far as Q&A, but I would like to open it up for questions. If you have questions on particular solutions, or if you have questions regarding secure remote working, any of the above.
Yeah, we'll just open it up for questions. And if you don't want to ask your questions by unmuting and speaking them out loud, you're more than welcome to drop your question in the chat box.
Not everybody wants.
Hey, this is Don from Checkpoint, and I just want to thanks Jerrod for doing all that. I know we have a number of people on the line that are from small businesses, medium businesses, probably not very many very large ones, but just to let you know, on a one-on-one basis, or if anybody wants to say anything on the chat here, we're willing to work with you in whatever that requires. We do business with some of the largest companies in Arkansas that you would certainly know the names of if we said, but we also go down to a much smaller footprint, but give that same kind of protection. So we can do a free assessment for anybody that's interested, let you know what maybe the gaps are in your coverage, what it would take to fill those. So anybody that wants to follow up with us, we're happy to talk to you, big or small.
And I did have a question come in. So what's the best way to contact us if we have, if we want to speak with either your own company or companies that you help service? So you can definitely contact Don, who just spoke, dpenning@checkpoint.com, DPENNING, or myself, jpiker@checkpoint.com. Yeah, there we go. So we also had a question, do we have anything for home-based business owner? Yes, so we also have a solution that, I didn't talk about much today, but it is basically the unmanaged version of our SANDBLAST agent solution, and it's referred to as Zone Alarm. And it also provides a solution for mobile devices as well. So if you go out to Zone Alarm, I think you can actually get free trials right now for the Zone Alarm software, and that can help protect your home business as well, or even your home PCs and personal devices. Next question, what are the primary regions overseas responsible for attacks? Iran, North Korea, China, Russia, or other? I would say that we still see a lot from China and Russia, obviously. Iran and North Korea, to a lesser extent. Obviously, Checkpoint sees quite a few attacks from Iran because it's an Israeli-based company. But I would say overall, globally, still China and Russia are the two top talkers. Any other questions?
There's no other questions. If you have a question that you think of later, feel free to shoot that email to me. I think everybody should have my email, as I've been emailing everybody that's in this webinar, and I will relay that information to Jerrod, or you can just email it directly to them. I want to thank everybody for signing up and participating in this webinar with us today. I appreciate your attendance and your participation. I really want to thank Checkpoint for allowing us to do this today, for sponsoring this, for helping us come together with this awesome presentation. Jerrod, it was fantastic. Look forward to working with you all again in the future. And if nobody has anything else they'd like to add, I will close this out. All right.
Thanks again.
And like I mentioned at the beginning, Startup Junkie offers no cost consulting to entrepreneurs. So if you have any, if there are any entrepreneurs or small business owners on the webinar call that have other issues that they want to talk about, we're available. We're taking virtual calls, consulting sessions, and you can find us at startupjunkie.org. Everybody have a great day.